Okay, now we're getting into the tech a little bit. This module is laying the foundations for a greater understanding of delivery destinations. In order to make a proper delivery, we need to understand the relevant color space for any particular delivery destination. First, we'll start with a quick overview of what a color space actually is in the context of digital film. A color space is a system that represents colors through clusters of numeric values referred to as tuples. In RGB, we have 3 color channels. Each channel is capable of having a single value on any given pixel. Because of this, any pixel in RGB has its color denoted by 3 numbers, referred to as an RGB triplet. This means that the RGB color space uses combinations of red, green, and blue value to create all possible colors within the color space. Video, delivered in the RGB color space, such as the 4444 codecs, is not typically chroma subsampled. We'll cover that term in a later lecture in this module. A variant of RGB called sRGB is the standard for PC monitors and the internet. This is the color space you'll have been viewing online graphics and images in, as well as video games. You might think we're delivering our web videos to sRGB upon hearing that, but that is quite often not the case. The RGB color space is simple enough, and we get good mileage out of it whilst working in the grade, as it tends to preserve the greatest amount of color information. But when we deliver, we are rarely delivering videos with the RGB color space. The next color space we are going to cover is YCBCR. YCBCR, often incorrectly referred to as YUV, is a color space used commonly in digital video and broadcast. This color space is typically used with chroma subsampling, which works by reducing color information whilst preserving the black-white information. The reason for this is that the human eye is more sensitive to contrast than it is to color. That means we can afford to sacrifice some color information for the sake of contrast, and that this will make little, if any, perceptible difference. The truth is that many codecs use YCBCR as opposed to RGB color space because it allows for more efficient use of the video bandwidth. Any codec with a 422 denotation, such as ProRes 422 or DNxHD 185, use the YCBCR color space, as do the H.264 and H.265 main and high profiles. This sounds odd, but most media players will perform some kind of YCBCR to RGB conversion for the sake of playback. Now, the above two can sound a little abstract, but our practical takeaway is as follows. Files delivered to us in YCBCR have less color information than those delivered to us in full RGB. It is preferable to work with a 4444 codec whilst grading, as it gives us the greatest possible accuracy when performing secondary grades. This is only true if the camera captured in RGB 12-bit. If the camera captured in 10-bit or 8-bit, then it's fine to use a YCBCR codec, like ProRes 422HQ, for files we work on during the grade. The final color space we're going to cover is XYZ, and I know, more capital letters. This one is not quite as important during the grade itself. It only concerns a single delivery destination, and that is digital cinema. Now, XYZ can get extremely complicated. I'm not going to deep dive into the math because it's not going to help you in the grade, but we'll go over a little bit so you have a grounding as to why it's important. XYZ was formulated as a color space that could represent every single visible color. This means that every color a camera might possibly capture, and by extension every color relevant to film and video, can be expressed within the XYZ color space. However, there's a technical problem. A proportion of the colors expressed within the XYZ actually have negative R, G, or B values. Because monitors and televisions are using additive color space, which means their lowest value is 0 and they cannot go negative, it's not physically possible for them to display colors with a negative component. This means that there's a compromise. Certain colors that can be denoted with an XYZ can never actually be properly converted to RGB for playback. They come out desaturated, with their RGB values capped at the minimum or maximum possible values the display can manage. Now, all of this sounds really complicated and confusing, but you don't need to worry. The practical takeaway from this is that delivery to digital cinema should have the best possible color information, which XYZ provides. This comes down to a color space conversion at the end of the grade, which we will cover when we discuss DCP delivery later. So do not worry about the XYZ color space. I needed to cover it as a topic, but it makes no real practical difference to us unless we're delivering to cinema, and even then it's primarily a matter of setting things up before the grade begins in earnest. So this was a not-so-light foray into the subject of color space. It all sounds complicated, but the practical takeaways are very simple. In fact, not very much changes as a result of this knowledge. We're still showing a preference to work with 4444 files where possible, and we still deliver to H.264 or H.265 for web. We're going to cover chroma subsampling in the next lecture, so click on through once you're ready. So, now on to chroma subsampling. We've heard this phrase a few times by now, but we're finally going to dig into it and find out what it means and why the knowledge of this matters during the grade. We've already established that the human eye is more sensitive to contrast than to colour. We can use this information to make more efficient use of bandwidth and storage when dealing with digital video files. Chroma subsampling discards colour information to keep the bandwidth requirements of digital video down. The extent to which the information is reduced is denoted by the sampling ratio. Now, we've seen the numeric denotation 444 and 422, right? These are the sampling ratios. They indicate how much colour information has been discarded by chroma subsampling. 4444 indicates that no chroma subsampling has taken place and that all colour information is intact. Now, things get a little more complex here, as subsampling might not work in the way that you think. We'll go over what the numbers indicate first. The first number, and this is 4 most of the time, denotes the horizontal size of any given sample. The second number, and this is typically 4 or 2, denotes the number of chroma samples within the sample size denoted by the first number. This means that it can never be higher than the first number, only equal to it or less. The third number denotes the number of differences in colour between the first and second rows of pixels in an image. Again, it cannot be higher than the first number, but can go down to 0. The fourth number denotes an alpha channel, and doesn't concern us unless we're working with a VFX pipeline. What this means is that a 4:2 ratio of the image contains only half as much colour information compared to a 4444 image. The horizontal resolution of the colour is halved. The number of changes we get in a sample size of 4 is only 2. This essentially discards half of the colour information in an image. Now, this sounds drastic, but the effect is actually only visible at magnifications of 200% or greater. Also, at 420 subsampling, we only have a quarter of the colour information compared to the original 4444 image, as it's got half the horizontal and half the vertical colour resolution of a 4444 image. The practical gains of subsampling colour like this are that a 422 image only needs 2/3 of the bandwidth of a 4444 image, and suffers no perceptible effects at standard magnifications and viewing distances. Now, the practical takeaways from all this are relatively simple. We don't set subsampling manually. It's typically an aspect of the codec that we choose. For working files, we can't see the difference between 4444 and 422, but the secondary keyer can. As we've said before, keying will be easier on a 12-bit 4x4 file like DNxHR4444 compared to a 10-bit YCBCR file like ProRes 422. Conversely, we already know that the perceptible difference between 4444 and 422 is almost nil, so we can safely deliver 422 and even 420 files for broadcast with little concern of the image being visibly degraded. Most web platforms like YouTube will process the video you upload to them, and they will end up 420 subsampled anyway. In SDR video, this isn't too significant. So this was a good look at chroma subsampling. In the next lecture we tackle gamma, which can be quite difficult to understand at first. So click on through once you're ready. Okay, now on to gamma. Gamma, simply put, is what makes Bruce Banner go bright green. Nah, I'm just kidding. We're going to talk about Rec 709 and log gamma in this lecture, as they have the greatest impact on the grade. And we'll go over gamma for delivery as well. Now, we could go into the math on gamma, but that turns into a long and confusing road. We'll focus on what makes a practical difference to us during the grade here, as that's what this course is about. Now, the first thing we'll discuss is the difference between Rec 709 gamma, sometimes called standard, and log when recording. By now, you should have heard the phrase log gamma, and we're going to keep this limited to the practical effect this has on the grade. Log gamma captures an image which seems very flat and washed out at first, but this gives us the most leeway to work with during the grade. With standard gamma, more or less what we shoot is what we get. When shooting Rec 709, we run the risk of losing details in the dark and bright parts of the image and have less leeway to work with during the grade. In this shot you can see here we've got a blown out highlight on this guy's football shirt. Some of these shadows don't have a great deal of detail, and if we go forwards again, there's weird highlights here on the football shirt that in log would not be blown out and would have preserved detail. The same is also true of this goalpost here. And this hot spot back here would have more detail as well and wouldn't be as jarring. Now this one's a little bit elevated in the shadows, but we'd still kind of retain more detail in the crowd back here as well. So if the detail is missed at the point of capture for whatever reason, it's gone forever and there's no getting it back. Log reduces the risk of this by more evenly distributing the values towards the middle of the tonal range. We can then manually redistribute those values with a much greater level of freedom compared to Rec. 709 Gamma. Now, the practical takeaway from this is that if you capture an image in log, you have more freedom in deciding its creative look during the grade, and some looks can only be achieved through a grade, and will be much better facilitated by capturing in log gamma. Now, no one is saying that Rec. 709 cannot produce a good image, just that the number of options you have when capturing in log is far greater, and it also captures more detail, especially in the darker parts of the image. So now we're going to move on to considerations of gamma for delivery. The values in a video file must be distributed to best fit a specific gamma and will only look right when displayed on a device which is set to display that particular gamma correctly. Non-log gamma is also denoted by a number such as 2.2 or 2.4, and we need to make sure our gamma is a match for our project's delivery destination. So if you've graded on a 2.2 gamma monitor, it will look right on a 2.2 gamma monitor when played back. However, if this were a 2.4 or a 2.6 delivery, it would look completely wrong. It would look too bright and washed out, or it would look way too dark and crushed. So, we need to remember the following values. The gamma for web is 2.2, and grading on a standard PC GUI monitor is good enough for web videos. The gamma for broadcast is 2.4. I strongly recommend an external reference monitor for broadcast work. You can deliver broadcast work with a standard GUI monitor, provided your gamma is correct, but it's still not great. It's better to have an external reference monitor. And the gamma for digital cinema is 2.6. An external reference monitor is essential for cinema work. It's simply non-negotiable. If you don't have a 2.6 P3 capable external reference monitor, you should not be trying to deliver to a digital cinema, period. So this has been a pretty surface level examination of gamma, and that's just because going into the hardcore math isn't that useful for us at this point. This is the end of the color space module, so click on through to the next module once it's available and when you're ready.